The most important story in human history has been unfolding right on our noses for decades, suppressed by the very institutions we trust to tell us the truth. The elites, the Harvards, the Pentagon lackeys, the two-faced White House antics from both parties, the intelligence agencies, all of whom are, in theory, supposed to work for us, the people. Yet for decades, these gatekeepers have operated from fear. Fear of what happens if you and I learn the truth. But really they operate from fear of losing their power. And they will literally do anything to keep that power. Today, and for the second time, I sit down with who I designate as one of, if not the most connected and hardest working individuals on the front lines of modern disclosure, Danny Sheehan. If you've been following the UFO disclosure timeline for any length of time, you'll know Danny. Constitutional lawyer, went toe-to-toe with the US government over Pentagon Papers, the Karen Silkwood case, Iran-Contra, the Attica prison uprising, and many others. And you will likely know that he's been at the center of virtually every major inflection point in the modern push for UAP transparency. What you may not know, and what I didn't even know until this conversation, is how deep and connected the rabbit hole actually goes. In this conversation, we go literally everywhere. The real story behind the Harvard Tribunal of Dr. John Mack, not the sanitized version, but what actually happened behind those doors. The questions they asked or refused to ask about extraterrestrials, and new to me, the connection to the Rockefeller family who actually wanted to fund the hearings that upon hearing that, Harvard immediately shut everything down and tried to bury the story. We'll also get into MILABS, which are military abductions, underground bases, the various beings that experiencers describe, and what the military knows about these species. We talk about the secret nuclear war in space that no one is talking about or even aware of that is happening right now today. Also get into Trump's UFO wildcard and whether one man could burn the entire disclosure chessboard to the ground to protect himself from exposure in the Epstein file debacle. And one of my favorite parts is we get into why JFK was actually assassinated, who ordered it, and who pulled the triggers. We talk about global politics because do not be confused. Disclosure, or more accurately, the current lack of it, is not about whether UFOs or aliens are real. It's about power, period. Who holds it, who loses it, and what catastrophic disclosure actually means and looks like when the people running the program decide that they'd rather burn the world to the ground than hand over the keys to the biggest and most highly guarded secret in human history. Danny lays out the constitutional stakes more clearly than anyone I've heard in this conversation, and how he is working to force the House and other committee votes to try and checkmate the gatekeepers who have held the upper hand since the National Security Act of 1947. We touch on how we're inching closer to midnight on the Doomsday clock. What happens if this president does decide to go rogue with the most dangerous information on Earth and nuclear weapons at his fingertips? And finally, Danny says something towards the end of our conversation that gave me chills. That right now, today, through the next 5 to 7 years or so, could be the most consequential moments in the history of this iteration of modern human civilization. And that whoever wins these battles and ends up making the final decisions could echo across our planet and species for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. So stop your scroll, put the clicker down, and pay attention. It's time to lock in. We had our last sit-down chat in May of last year, so quite a bit's happened. I know we talked
quite a bit. You're right.
Yeah, we talked pretty extensively about all your work with Citizens for Disclosure and everything you're doing out in Washington. So I kind of wanted to get into some of the other questions that I didn't have a chance to address on our last interview. So just officially thank you again for taking the time. And again, just while we're recording, I want to give a shout out that Danny Sheehan, I think, is the hardest working man in this disclosure movement. So again, thank you for everything you do. And I know the audience really appreciates all your work. So I kind of wanted to start back on something that's not quite talked about quite as often at the moment. And this is your relationship in working with John Mack.
Yes.
John is him and his work are to me some of the most fundamental and important work that's been done in the space. And maybe even start before that with Arnie Arnoldson at Malmstrom and kind of how that all rolled in to
Right.
John's story. If you wouldn't mind, kind of just
Sure.
and then we can kind of start from there.
Okay. I met Colonel Arnoldson back when I was general counsel, early on when I was general counsel for the Disclosure Project with Dr. Stephen Greer. We were Dr. Greer had contacted me at Jesuit headquarters and had asked me if I would help vet potential witnesses to appear before a press conference at the National Press Club back in, I believe, May of 2001. And in that context, I met Colonel Arnoldson. And he had been at Malmstrom Air Force Base and had been a commander, actually, of a number of the sites. Bob Salas was at one of them, but Colonel Arnoldson was in charge of three of them, and he was getting the messages coming in that there was a UFO over each of these places. Actually, he got the message from the Malmstrom base first, and he called into NORAD to report that there was an intruder, a UFO, that had come over the top of the missile site and had shut off 10 of their missiles. And when he got to NORAD, it got through to them. The person at NORAD said, "Are you attempting to report a UFO?"
And he said, just right off the bat, that's what he opened with.
Right. Well, he described what it was. He said there was this huge craft of some sort, glowing, throbbing kind of craft that had come on up over the top of the base, according to Salas, that gave him the description of what it was. And he said, "Are you attempting to report a UFO?" And he told me later, he said that was the most important moment of his entire life, of having to decide whether he was going to admit it, that that's what he was doing. And he said, "Yes, I am. Yes, I am." And they said, "Well, that's interesting because it turns out that there have been craft reported over two of the other sites that are up there in Montana right now." So the bottom line is I ended up meeting him in probably April, late March, early April of 1970, or 2001, right? In preparation for the press conference that we were getting set to do with the Disclosure Project. So I had interviewed him. I knew him. He was one of the really credible people, and he testified there at the hearing. And then I brought him to meet his congressperson. He was there in Washington, D.C., so he was in full uniform with all of his, history and all of his base, his staging and everything where he'd been. And so I bring him to meet his congressperson. And the colonel starts telling him all about what happened. And the congressperson says, "Look, I understand you and I believe you." I said, "And I know that there's a number of other people here on the Hill who believe you, that this is a real thing, but we don't dare say anything. We don't dare say anything. If we did, that millions of dollars would pour into our campaign against us in the next term, and we'd be out." And so he said, "But I'll find the other people and talk with them and share your story with them." And we get all done. We get all done with the meeting. Gee, I'm trying to remember his name. Anyway, the colonel and I leave the congressional office building, the House office building, and we go out onto the front steps, right? And he's standing in full uniform, looking right across the street at the Capitol building. And he stops and he gets tears in his eyes. This guy, full colonel in his full bird colonel uniform, right? Air Force uniform. And he said, this is so extraordinary. He said, I'd always dreamed of this moment, that I would be able to get to come to see my congressman and tell him what it is that I knew, that even though it was classified, and I was told not ever to talk with anybody about it. Uh, and so he actually had tears in his eyes, and so I met him, and I met him a couple other times after this, at a couple of conferences. I think the Contact in the Desert, or I think it was probably I believe it was the International UFO Congress in Laughlin, Nevada. I met with him later. So he was just a terrific guy. But after I had already been legal counsel for Dr. John Mack. That was back in 1994. This is like 7 years earlier, right? And I had become the legal counsel for the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research, which Dr. Mack had set up there in Cambridge. So I had gotten to interview face to face dozens of individual people who were completely sincere in their belief that they'd had face to face encounters with extraterrestrial beings, that had been taken on the craft and gotten to have telepathic communications with them, etc. So when I told Colonel Arnoldson about that, and so he had of course had the craft reported to him by the people that had been in the missile sites, but he had not had any direct contact in physical contact with him, but he had in fact insisted upon filing a UFO contact report. Okay, and so when I'd been with Dr. Mack earlier, John and I had, after we got through the whole malaise of trying to deal with the Harvard faculty committee that was trying to revoke his tenure.
So we can kind of get into that later if we want, but yeah.
But the bottom line is that John had me become legal counsel for the peer group, the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research, and it was there that I got to actually meet with a number of the people, because I was doing for Dr. Mack earlier what Dr. Greer asked me to do later for the Disclosure Project, was vet these people, talk with them, ascertain as a lawyer, cross-examine them, check their sources, try to check their bona fides, to do all that kind of stuff. So we were trying to lend whatever additional value I could, as a practicing trial lawyer that had been fairly well known for having engaged in a number of major cases and litigations that had proved to be quite successful, to bring that kind of additional level of credibility to the reports of the UFOs. And so that's how I got asked by Dr. Greer to be legal counsel for him, because I had met Stephen at I think Dr. Mack and I were both invited to deliver presentations to the Orange County MUFON chapter down below Los Angeles. And so Dr. Greer was there, as was Linda Moulton Howe. And that's where I'd met a lot of the other people there. So that's how I met Dr. Greer. That's why he later asked me to become legal counsel for the Disclosure Project, and that's how I met Colonel Arnoldson.
Now, when it's interesting you bring up Greer, and I know that you represented both of them, because Greer has a little bit of an interesting take on sort of the bulk of what Dr. Mack's work was fundamentally about, where, Dr. Mack essentially believed that his patients had some sort of extraordinary experience and gave them the benefit of the belief of the experience, whereas where Greer has a little bit of a I don't know, almost I don't know, I want to call it cynical, but he believes it's a bit of a government operation. And I'm not trying to stir the pot or anything, but
Sure.
I'm just curious on your kind of opinion on the sort of differing views about the and I like the reason I'm bringing it up is because I kind of want to get into some of this deeper stuff that people don't really want to talk about.
Okay, well, sure. No, the interesting point about Dr. Greer is that how many UFOs have to be real in order for we to be in that world. And Stephen has never doubted the fact that the UFOs are real, and that their source is extraterrestrial, and that they're coming here, and the fact that our U.S. military is in possession of more than one of these craft, and the fact that
and just to be clear, Greer takes a lot of heat. He has to get tremendous credit, especially for a lot of the early work he did. But anyway, continue.
Absolutely. But what happened is once Dr. Greer came to know that this was a real phenomenon, and he began to turn from his practice as a medical doctor, an emergency room doctor, into spending more and more of his time focusing on this particular issue. It's one of those kind of things. Once you know, it's hard to sort of get back to your normal activities. And so the bottom line is that Dr. Greer had come to be completely convinced that the UFOs were a real phenomenon, real vehicles coming from other star systems in our galaxy, and that the beings were non-human, and that they were here and being on our planet. And then of course he came to realize that our United States military forces were in possession of one as early as 1947, at least when I first started talking with him. Later on we got more information about a couple earlier sites and the potential thing in Italy, the 1933 thing. But the bottom line is he became convinced that these were real. But then he realized that since our military had acquired access to some of these UFOs and some of the technology, he began to probe into it and discovered that they were in fact attempting to reverse engineer the technology, and they were attempting to generate man-made craft that either mimicked the capabilities of some of these UFO craft. And then he went to the next step of saying that they had actually figured out how to master some of this technology, and that they were actually manufacturing craft that looked virtually just exactly like the UFOs and had some of the capabilities of the UFOs, and that they were flying them around. And that Area 51 and S4, the Skunk Works and stuff of Lockheed Martin, were deeply involved in this program, all of which has now been borne out. I mean, that all of that is true. And he was way out. Dr. Greer was way out how to have everybody, but jumping from the fact that there was this extraterrestrial civilization coming and going in the UFOs to knowing that our military was trying to develop weapons with them, and then he became upset about that, and so he kept, at the slightest provocation, he would start talking about that part of it, and then when he discovered that the people in our military and in our CIA specifically, in their operations directorate and their science and technology division, were trying to work up flying these things around, and allowing people to, in fact, in Dr. Greer's opinion, intentionally causing them to think these are UFOs from another civilization, from an extraterrestrial civilization. So the military people were engaged in this process of somehow trying to encourage or stimulate the belief on the part of our citizenry that these UFOs were flying all around everywhere. And whereas Dr. Greer began to formulate the thesis that a majority of them were actually these man-made craft. Okay. And then he moved to the point of when he found out about Operation Northwoods, that had taken place back in 1961 or so, when Curtis LeMay and the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Kennedy administration had actually proposed, because they wanted to militarily invade and occupy Cuba, because they were communists, he thought. And so they wanted to invade it and occupy it and drive the Fidel Castro government out of power. So what Curtis LeMay was doing is he and others in the Joint Chiefs of Staff had proposed this thing called Operation Northwoods, which was to dress up a lot of Cuban refugees who had fled from Cuba and were living up in the Miami area, dress these guys up in Cuban Castro uniforms, military uniforms, and attack our military base at Guantanamo and kill American Navy personnel, and also to blow up shopping malls in Miami. in Miami, specifically targeting Miami-based refugees from Cuba to slaughter them and kill them and blame it on Fidel Castro so they could infuriate our American public and that they would support the invasion. So when the Dr. Greer learned about the reality of the Operation Northwoods project and the lengths to which the military were willing to go to generate false flag activities to pursue their own larger objectives, he then began to, I would assume at the beginning, speculate about, but then he began to become convinced that this operation was planned by the military and that they were going to use these mock-ups, if you will, of the real UFOs to stage a false UFO military invasion. And that they were then going to be able to invoke the continuity of government plans and declare a state of national emergency and basically overthrow the government. I wasn't agreeing with him on that. I said, look, I know perfectly well about the Northwoods operation. And so I know perfectly well what they're capable of. I've done major litigations against these people, the whole national security infrastructure. And so I know they're perfectly capable of that. And I don't doubt that they may have done some war games scenario planning about potentially doing something like that. But they do those things all the time. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it. But you have to be honest about this. I mean, making military plans to potentially do something is enough of a thing to cause you great concern that they may actually do it.
Yeah,
And
it's it's hard to find that line of what is genuine and what is a facade of sorts. Yeah.
So you can't trust them. I mean, you certainly can't trust them because they're actively engaged in deceiving us all the time. And so Stephen went to the point of being so operationally clear in his own mind that they were planning to do this, that he spends a lot of his time talking about it. And then what he began to do was attribute even contacts, even direct physical contacts, that a number of people that with John Mack had been convinced they had a face-to-face encounter with UFOs, genuine extraterrestrial UFOs, and the personnel that were occupants and pilots of the UFOs, and that they would describe them physically, what they looked like, and the kind of experience they went through with being put on the examination table and having telepathic communications with them, and all that. And then Dr. Greer began to assert that a substantial majority of those experiences were not real, that they were what he called military abductions, military intelligence, MI abductions, MILABS, MIL abductions, military abductions, and they had some kind of capacity to actually deceive the people that were being abducted into falsely believing that they were being abducted by ETs. And it somehow implanted into their memories a belief that they had actually physically seen ETs and been in contact with ETs. And I began to make it clear to Dr. Greer that I didn't believe that. I believed.
Yeah, because you worked with Mack for all those years. I mean,
oh, yes.
Have you seen evidence of something like what Greer was inferring with something like that?
Oh, no. I
have
don't.
You personally? Because it seems like that's almost harder to believe than the actual phenomena interacting with humans to that extent, where they would be that convinced of it being that profound if it was simply, an MK Ultra type abduction experience being done by the military. And that's what doubters will say. It's like, it's just, MK Ultra, and but it just seems when you and we'll get back to it, the when you listen to the stories, it just sounds so profound. I just find that hard to believe.
And I did too. But on the other hand, I had found it hard to believe what Stephen was indicating earlier about how far they had gone in advancing in their development of these craft. So I had been skeptical of that as well. And so it didn't damage our relationship. I mean, Stephen and I have always gotten along very well, and I was legal counsel for 20 years for the Disclosure Project. It wasn't until Lou Elizondo contacted me and asked me to legally represent him in preparing and filing a complaint with the Inspector General's office of the Defense Department, complaining about the retaliation that had been undertaken against him, Lou Elizondo. And then when I went and met with Stephen, it was at the 20th anniversary of the 2001 press conference that we participated in together back in 2001. So in 2021, I discussed with Stephen, the fact that I'd been approached by Lou Elizondo to represent him to help prepare his complaint to the Defense Department, et cetera. And Stephen expressed, some surprise over the fact that Lou had asked me to do it. And that he was upset about it, and thought that Lou was part of a cabal of these people who were ultimately planning to stage this false flag attack, and that therefore having anything to do with Lou Elizondo or Chris Mellon or any of those people that were engaged with them was somehow inconsistent with being able to continue being the attorney for the Disclosure Project, because he was so insistent upon asserting a certain thesis, a consistent thesis coming from the Disclosure Project, i.e. from him, uh, about how to interpret reality, is that he thought that it would not be consistent with that to have me be there. But we tried it for a while. He said, okay, to his credit, he said, look, I'm willing to entertain your being continuing to be legal counsel for the Disclosure Project, even while you're representing Lou Elizondo. And that I went forward and prepared the complaint for Lou, went with Lou to meet the Inspector General, briefed the Inspector General, and then an ever increasing number of his staff about the reality that Lou Elizondo was sharing with them in classified settings, which confirmed a significant amount of what it was that Greer was actually asserting. Not about the planning to have the false flag, but the fact that the ETs, the phenomenon was real, the UFOs were real, that they were piloted by sentient beings, whether they were extra dimensional or extraterrestrial. Lou kept saying he wasn't sure, but that they were real. And so I kept saying to myself, look, there's some degree of a significant agreement between Greer and with Lou. And so I thought that it was appropriate for me to continue working with both groups. But there came a point in time when Greer had discerned that he thought that Lou was misrepresenting facts, was deceiving the public. It was part of a psyops operation to run a fast one on the public, especially. That's
Well,
right.
and I didn't mean to go down too much a rabbit hole with
Okay,
Lou
that's right.
and Greer, but I'm
Yeah.
glad you said that, because it's something that the people that kind of the doubters, the debunkers, whatever you want to call them, will point to that exact thing, that they are institutional, they are government insiders.
Yeah.
Even Colonel Nell, people will say that about him, but it's obviously at some point when this pulls apart, there's and as it's stated over and over, there are people inside these factions that are on opposing sides. You're gonna have to have a certain element of people that are from the institutions that are coming out to be
That's right.
in favor of disclosure. So it
That's
never
right.
made sense to me why people will. It doesn't seem like it's a. And I know people will draw hard lines, like, once you're in government, you're always a government insider, and you
Right.
can never
Right.
trust them. And it's like, the
Right.
government is not one thing. And I think you might have even said this in our last interview. It's a fractured million different groups and interests and directions, and so you have to to be able to accept the fact that there are people that are going to be quote unquote insiders, but do have genuine good intentions to help the disclosure movement along.
Well,
And I'll let
the thing that's
go ahead.
important is the fact that, remember that I, in effect, started my whole career at Harvard Law School as the one of the co-founders of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review. We initiated the case that generated the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources of having whistleblowers from inside whatever the unethical or illegal operation was that was going on, whether it's a tobacco company or covert operations of the military or whoever it was. That so I was very much birthed in my legal career with understanding the value of people who are inside the bad guy organization, as perceived by reformers, to know that they were providing essential information for us to get at some of the wrongdoing and to try to stop the wrongdoing of these bad guy organizations. So I had a different attitude and a different level of experience, I guess, than Dr. Greer did with these people. So I had a different opinion about these folks, and I knew very well that there was some question, about these folks and what they were up to. And in fact, I had made a number of public statements that I was very leery of this To the Stars Academy operation that was going down. It seemed to me to have all the earmarks of a defense intelligence agency, psyops operation of trying to give people the impression that there was real genuine disclosure going on, but that there was a plan for a modified hangout. That they would release some bits of information and try to placate the American public into thinking that we'd gotten, an adequate amount of information about this. So I understood that and had made public statements about it. And despite the fact that I'd made those statements, Lou Elizondo understood, I think, the value of having me work with him as an experienced person in dealing in the civilian population, being able to work together with informants and insiders to get information conveyed to the government in an effective way. And so we proceeded apace on that for some time. But as Dr. Greer became more and more convinced that what Lou Elizondo and Carl Nell and Chris Mellon and others, were engaged in was a psyops operation. He was advising me to sever my relationship with them, so as not to be tainted with that. And I tried to explain to him that I had a different attitude about working with people from inside like that, and that while I shared a good deal of the beliefs that he had about the whole subject, that I didn't agree with the extreme lengths to which he had gone in attributing complete illegal motives to them. But then he told me that, okay, he thought the point had been reached where I had to decide whether I was going to remain as legal counsel for the Disclosure Project or continue to represent Lou and to be able to meet with people like Carl Nell and Chris Mellon and those other people. I said, no, I'm fine. I said, I don't view there being any real conflict at all. But there finally came a point in time where he
Had to
had
go your separate ways.
yeah,
Yeah.
he just yeah. So we did, and it's totally cordial. And I've talked to Stephen a number of times since then. Very cordial, and he fully understands that I agree with a substantial a portion of the information that he has, and I am willing to acknowledge that I had been skeptical about some of the things that he had been asserting, which turned out to be true, and that they were things that people like Lou and the other folks there that weren't admitting. So that Greer knew things that were true that they were not admitting. But the bottom line is, I have cordial relationships with all the people, and as do I think a lot of the people like Jesse Michaels and other people that do interviews of them all the time, Russ Coulthart, that we all have relations with people inside and outside of of this legacy group, and so that's where we are now. And I'm very cordial with everybody.
Of course. Yeah. And again, I wasn't, I didn't intend to gossip or anything like that.
No,
I was just,
I know that.
you are so nuanced in your connections over the decades. It's incredible to just hear how you thread those together. To kind of go back to Dr. Mack a little bit, because I just want to dwell on that a little bit longer.
Sure.
In terms of the work that you saw him do, I kind of want to just get sort of your interpretation, your take on some of his processes, some of the patients, I guess you'd call them, that he worked with, just sort of your kind of big picture point of view about Dr. Mack's entire experience, and also how the tragic end seemed to come about under less than, it was, you could definitely call that nefarious situations. But I feel like Dr. Mack gets sort of, he's there, but I just want to keep that name top of mind. One of the things that I try to do with my outlet is to try to reach the people that are beyond the UFO buffs that are constantly on UFO Twitter 20 times a day, more of a disseminator to the general folks and what it means. And I really think that John's story is Dr. Mack. His story is incredible and important.
No, I do too. It was, that I get, it was funny. I was sitting in my office. I was teaching at the University of California at Santa Barbara. It was right in the kind of the height of the Iran-Contra crisis. And we had filed the major federal criminal racketeering act charges against the off-the-shelf enterprise. It was our office, the Christic Institute, out of the Jesuit headquarters, that had uncovered them and filed the public complaint against them, et cetera. And we were just in the process of getting the special prosecutor, Lawrence Walsh, to return criminal indictments against all these people. And I'd been invited to come out to the University of California at Santa Barbara to do a course, not just on the Iran-Contra thing, but on the hidden history of America, the history of the covert operations of the CIA from the end of World War II up to the present, because I'd become more or less expert in that entire area. And so I was engaged in that process, and I got a call from Roberts, was his name, Professor Roberts. He was a professor at the Santa Barbara City College, and he had been coming. He'd been coming to a lot of the lectures that I did in public speaking that I had done about it. And he approached me and asked me to come to dinner to his home. So I went to dinner at his home, and we got to the end of the dinner, and he said, "Do you mind if I ask you kind of a personal question?" I said, "No." I said, "Fine." And so he said, "What do you think about the UFO issue?" And I said, "I think it's extraordinarily important. I think it's one of the most important public policy issues there around." And I began to explain it to him. He said, "Oh, gee," he said, I wasn't sure that you knew." He said, "But look," he said, "my best friend, who I was his best man for Sally and him at their wedding." He said, I was the best friend of John when we were in the Air Force together in Korea after World War II. He said, and so he's contacted me and said, "This awful thing is happening at Harvard, that he's been dragged up in front of this secret tribunal at Harvard, and they're excoriating him." And it's a long and involved detailed story. I can give you as much detail as you want, but he said that he needs to have a lawyer to help him. And he said, I raised this with John about what about Danny Sheehan, who's done the Iran-Contra case and, all these different cases that he's done, Pentagon Papers and other things. And John said, "Oh, I don't think he'd be interested in this issue. It's awfully controversial," which has never scared me in the past. And so,
and maybe you could touch on, this is a little bit of the institutional, I don't know if it was intentional gatekeeping or they were just, they didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, meaning Harvard.
Yeah.
in why they were prosecuting John? So you can go
Oh
into
yeah.
that a little
Oh,
bit,
I know. I
just for
know.
some background if people
I
want.
know
But
exactly. I know exactly what happened because of course John explained it to me that after Professor Robinson put me in, he had John call me. So John called me and asked me to come back to Cambridge to talk with him and have a meeting. And I went back there, met John and Sally, his wife at the time, and he began to explain to me how this all happened. And that what had happened is that the United States military had this actual rule inside the military that if you encounter any kind of a UFO phenomenon, don't tell anybody about it. Do not tell anybody about it. And if you try to report it to your superiors in the chain of command, one of the very first things they're going to do is make you have a psychiatric exam. And in fact, Richard Dolan, in his 2-volume work, the UFOs in the National Security State, this kind of definitive work about extracting official documents and previously classified documents through the Freedom of Information Act, had actually recovered the internal documents showing that they had this official policy inside the Army and inside the Navy and inside the Air Force, that if you insist upon filing an encounter, a UFO encounter report, the first thing you have to do is get a psychiatric exam. And they were taking the position, well, this is such an extraordinary assertion. You have to be able to demonstrate that you're intellectually and mentally sound. So we're going to make you have to go get a psychiatric exam. Of course, that goes in your military file.
which was a way for them to intentionally put that in your record so that they had leverage against you down the line. I know that happened to Bob Salas.
Totally, absolutely. And not only that, but to deter anybody from pressing forward to actually file an actual written report about the UFO encounter. And so what happened is that a number of these people have been sent to Harvard University, to the clinic, at the medical clinic at Harvard University, to get these psychiatric exams. And John had been the guy, because John was the head of the psychiatric department at Harvard Medical School, right? And so that he's the one that got to interview these guys. And he told me, this is my own personal conversation. He said, look, I interviewed, I have a dozen of these fairly high-ranking U.S. military officials. He said, and I did the whole psychiatric workup on all of them, and all of them were very much within the normal parameters of psychiatric health. Yet they kept insisting upon filing these reports. And so they've been ordered to go get a psychiatric exam. He said, so after about a half a dozen of these, he said, I was talking to my mother about it. I was explaining to my mother this extraordinarily interesting thing that was going on here. And she said, oh, you ought to go see the Hopkins boy. It turns out that Bud Hopkins and his family had been family friends of the Mack family,
Of the
right?
Mack family, wow.
And so they were all in this kind of fairly elite a group of people, right? And so said, because it turns out that Bud Hopkins, even though he's a sculptor and a major rich guy, from his family inheritances, he's got this hobby of going around interviewing people that have had these direct encounter experiences with ETs, and so maybe you should talk with him. So he did. He contacts Bud Hopkins and goes to see Bud, and Bud starts introducing him to all these other people. And so John ends up interviewing over 100 people, who all have asserted more than just the military guys who say, oh, we encountered a UFO in flight, or we in the Navy encountered one of them submerged, that was following our submarine around or something, that he started interviewing people who said, hey, look I've actually been abducted. I've actually been taken on board, like the Betty in Barney Hill,
Yeah.
And so he started interviewing these people because he said, we might as well get right down to it. it's one thing to be able to see kind of lights dancing around in the sky, or even seeing a craft that you can't quite identify, and it's doing all these bizarre things. But it's another thing to say one of these landed in the meadow by my house.
It took me up in their ship.
Yeah, and it ended up bringing me on board, and I had these telepathic communications with them, etc. And they were all, and they all kept saying much the same thing. They were trying to communicate to the human being that had been abducted that you've got to do something about these nuclear weapons. This is extraordinarily dangerous. What you're doing here. You got to, even though you're, Jane layperson here, no big important person, but you've got to do something about this. You got to stop them from contaminating, polluting their atmosphere all the time, and pouring chemicals into the rivers and poisoning your whole ecological system. And it turns out this pattern started arising with John. and John had been part of the scientists and professionals against nuclear weapons. And so there was this overlay.
We'll keep going, but that's where I just want to interject that this is where people will say is like Mack used his desires to kind of backdoor into this.
Yep.
But it seems like it was actually reinforcing the fact of his beliefs. It wasn't him interjecting any sort of intentions.
It was not. And I mean, they would just start chronologically, and he didn't hypnotize the people. It's important to remember. He did what they call holotropic breathing. This process that Stanislav Grof had developed, where you just get this person into a deep state of relaxation. They're not hypnotized. They're totally conscious of what's going on. And then it makes it easier for them. Their anxiety level drops way down, and they stop blocking these kind of memories that they have. And so John would use that particular process. And then they would start talking about this type of communication they were having, and that these beings kept saying this stuff. You've got to stop the nuclear weapons. You got to get rid of the nuclear weapons. So he started saying, wait a second, this makes sense to me. And so he started to believe that that this was not some kind of figment of their imagination. There was something real going on here. But even when what he did is he prepared a paper, a scholarly paper. He'd written 100. He had published hundreds of academic papers. And
he was head of the department. He was head of the department.
He was head of the department at Harvard, right?
Yeah.
And so he prepared a scholarly paper and submitted it to the New England Journal of Medicine. Here's this interesting phenomenon. These people think this is happening to them. Here's all these military people that are trying to report these things, and there's something very peculiar going on here. And he sends this over to them, and it turns out that they sent it back to him with a note saying, "No, we're not going to publish this." Well, he was surprised. I mean, because not only he published dozens of scholarly papers before, but he had won the Pulitzer Prize for writing the definitive psychobiography of T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, right? And so he was kind of taken aback. And so he said, oh, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit back down with the paper, and I'm going to go into some greater depth, a lot more footnotes, a lot more academic and scientific. Then I'm going to resubmit it to him. And he did. So he sends it over. He sends it to them again. And within like 2 days, the executive secretary for Relman, Dr. Relman, was the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine. And he had ordered his executive secretary take the envelope, don't open it, and bring it back and hand deliver it to Dr. John Mack. So she shows up at his office with the packet and hands it to him and said, and Dr. Relman wanted me to inform you that not only are we not going to publish it, we're not even going to open it, and we're not going to read it.
Wow.
So he
just refused.
He was completely offended by it. So he's the one, John then contacted the publisher for a book and said, I'm going to write this up into a book and get it published. And that's what he did. And that's That's how.
So that first book was intended to be a paper, and they refused.
yes.
And he's kind of like, "Fuck you."
He said, "Look, I'm just going to. If that's the way you want to be about it, I'll just get it published, right?" And so as soon as it gets published, of course, the editor, anybody who's done a book, you always know the publishers try to figure out the jazziest title they can possibly get, so that people will pick it off the shelf, right? And so they picked the title "Abductions," human encounters with aliens. So it's a little over the top, that kind of a title. And so, like, within a week of it hitting the newsstands, the bookstores, the dean of the Harvard Medical School comes into John's office and says, "John, I understand that you've just published this major book, and it's called Abductions, about these ET." And John said, "Yes, yeah, I did." He said, "Well, this is extremely interesting, and I'd like to talk to you about it." And John said, "Well, good, let's talk." And he said, "Well, look, the dean said, look, let's set up a little more formal operation, and let's get some of the other faculty to come to this. They're all going to want to know about this important book." And so here's John figuring that this is going to be like some grand rounds. He's going to get to kind of meet with members of the faculty, like a medical grand rounds, and explain to them, what this thing is. And so he shows up at the place and time assigned by the dean of the medical school, and here is this tribunal that's sitting in session, and here's chairing it, sitting right next to the dean of the medical school, is Dr. John Relman, who was the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, who had rejected it. He had absolutely refused to even read the paper, right? Is chairing the thing. And there's like 3 other people on the thing, including the legal counsel for Harvard University, sitting right next to him, And so John is going, "Whoa, this is this," and Relman immediately began to excoriate him, for insulting Harvard University by publishing something like this, as such drivel, and so completely irresponsible. And so John was completely taken aback. And what he does is John gets up from the meeting and leaves. He was trying to be a gentleman. He's very gentlemanly and very, he's that whole kind of, Bostonian elite family kind of stuff. And so he ends up again contacting his mother, who was still alive. She was like 90 years old, so he starts talking to her about this terrible thing that they're doing to him. And she said, "Well, you should get a lawyer. You should go see our family lawyers." And so he goes over to Boston and goes downtown to Boston and goes to their law firm that represents him and his estate planning and everything. It's Hale and Dorr. And the lawyer for the family, says, "Oh, give them anything they want. If they want the recordings of your sessions with them, give them to them. If they want to know whether you billed them or not, did you notify them that you were using any of their information for a study?" And they start really hammering away at him, trying to figure out, it's like the night that I went to Attica Prison, where the highway patrol pulled us off the highway. We'd been ordered by a court order into the prison before they killed everybody at Attica. And they pulled us aside and started measuring the depth of the tire treads on our car. To see if there was anything they could possibly do to get you to stop. And so that's what they were doing to him. And so that he was astonished that the lawyer wasn't giving him any better advice than that, and went back and again talked to his mother. And it turns out that Hale and Dorr were legal counsel for Harvard University.
So had they been tipped off prior?
No. It's just that they had the attitude that, that if in fact you've been brought up in front of a tribunal, even secretly at Harvard University, they weren't going to do a single thing except want to cooperate with that panel to do whatever it is they wanted to do to John. So it was a complete conflict of interest that the law firm hadn't even revealed to him, right? And so he calls his friend Rob Robinson, calls him out in Santa Barbara, and says, "This terrible thing is happening to me, blah, blah." And that's why Ron Robertson called me and said, maybe you'd be willing to do this. And that's how I met John. And so this is how I met John. And I got to be an intimate friend of his. And for 10 years, from 1994 all the way through to 2004, I was his friend and close counsel, and he and I write the time that he was hit by this drunk guy over in London, that we were actually planning to set up a Worldview Institute there in Cambridge, because John had come to the conclusion in conversations with me that this was a worldview conflict that had actually arisen here. That Harvard University was the guardian of the kind of scientific, logical, positivist, materialist worldview, and that this entire phenomenon challenged that worldview. And that's what was really motivating them, is they were like their hair caught on fire, over the fact that somebody from deep into the structures of Harvard University was actually suggesting that there might be some other worldview that was really functioning, some different reality, actually. And so we began talking about that, and we were in the process of trying to set up this Worldview Institute at Harvard. I was acting as legal counsel for the disclosure, or for the peer group, and getting to meet and interview people to vet them for John, so that I'd say I think this person actually is mentally ill, or this other person is just some celebrity seeker that they're just trying to get involved in this, or worse yet, are trying to infiltrate your group to try to discredit you. And so that's part of the function that I was helping to perform for John, but became good friends with him.
Right. So
Now I should point out.
You had a front row seat.
Yeah, well, I was in the front row.
Yeah.
And the thing that was peculiar that got some people confused about this is that what happened is, since I was admitted in New York, in the Southern District of New York, and in Washington, D.C., but I wasn't admitted to the bar in Massachusetts. And so what I did, out of an abundance of caution, is I went to talk to my professors at the Harvard Law School to get them to recommend somebody to me to be local counsel, because I'd have to have a local Massachusetts bar member to practice law there in Massachusetts to help John, right, at Harvard. And so I went and ended up talking with both with Lawrence Tribe and with Alan Dershowitz and some of my other professors. And it was Dershowitz, I think, that recommended Harvey Silverglate to be local counsel. So I called Harvey, who was a really good civil rights lawyer. He was busy in the middle of a big trial, and so he recommended this other young kid, that Eric McLeish. He was the nephew of Rod McLeish, the big poet. And so I talked to the kid, and I said, look, all you got to do is just agree to be my local counsel. Just hang back, and I'll tell you what's going on in the case, and to make sure you're adequately advised. Well, what happened as soon as Rod McLeish came on board, he kept saying, let's get rid of this thing. Let's make this thing go away. Let's just help them, give them what they want, or let's just have him go away, and leave him alone. And I said, wait a second, this is a fantastic opportunity here. I said, because John and I have been and went to see Lawrence Rockefeller, and had this long set of meetings with Lawrence Rockefeller, and Lawrence Rockefeller had agreed to fund the whole thing. He would fund an entire grand rounds. That we were going to call witnesses, and so that when I went to my first session with this tribunal, I come with John to the tribunal, and I arrive with him, and Dr. Relman just starts right out, kind of starting to attack him again. And so I said, excuse me, my name is Dan Sheehan. I'm a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. Did my master's work and was doing the PhD here at the Divinity School, and I'm representing John. And I can't understand exactly what's going on here. I said, this is obviously not an AAUP authorized panel of the American Association of University Professors. If you're going to challenge somebody's tenure, you have to go through very clear processes. Clearly, those haven't been followed here. So what is this actually all about? And Relman looks around, he says, well, what happened, he said, is that when Dr. Mack published this book, the dean here of the medical school started getting a number of calls, and people were asking questions about this book and what was going on, and he wasn't able to figure out what to tell them. And so he decided he'd better have a conversation with John. And as long as he was going to be having a conversation, he might as well have some other people from the faculty participate in this too. And that's what this is. And I said, I didn't say, what a ration of horse shit that is. I didn't say it like that. I said, oh, really? I said, well, that's interesting. I said, well, then in the spirit of cooperation, then, can you tell me who was it that called? And there was this big dead silence kind of falls over the whole room. And they all stood there looking at each other like for about 15 seconds. And finally, Relman looks over at the legal counsel, and she shakes her head like this and goes, no. He says, well, I'm sorry. He said, we're not at liberty to discuss that. And I said, oh, okay. Well, look, we're trying to get the information to be able to answer whatever questions they were asking, like what were the questions that they were asking? Another big long silence falls over the place. And again, he looks over at the legal counsel. She shakes her head no. He says, I'm sorry, we're not at liberty to discuss that either. And so I said, okay. I said, look, again, in the spirit of cooperation, can I just let you know, I said, that John and I have gone and met with Lawrence Rockefeller, and Lawrence Rockefeller is willing to fund the entire presentation of information and evidence to you to answer whatever those questions are that would be logical for you to have. And so I just wanted to let you know that we stand ready to present all kinds of witnesses. Because I said, and I said, but then let me ask you this. I said, are either one of the two following fact questions going to be at issue in this process, whatever the nature of it is? Number one, whether extraterrestrial life actually exists. And secondly, whether at least some of these UFO sightings might actually be vehicles from an extraterrestrial civilization coming to our planet. And John Relman looks around, he says, well, absolutely, they're going to be relevant in this case. And it's absolutely ridiculous to think that either one of those things is true. That's what he said. That's when I said, oh, then I guess I should tell you that we've gone and met with Lawrence Rockefeller, and he's agreed to fund, this grand rounds and explain this whole thing to you. And immediately he said, no. And the legal counsel, she actually jumped up. She actually stood up and she said, absolutely not. She said, we're not going to allow this process to be turned into some kind of circus, she said. And I said, okay, John, well, I guess that's where they are. I said, we've offered to give them the information. So come on, let's go. Well, John was embarrassed because he was trying to be polite to them, right? And I was saying, nope, that's it, we're over here. So I just reached down and kind of literally lifted him out of his chair, saying, okay, we'll come back when you guys are ready to actually have the information. And so we got up and left. Okay. And then the panel threw a fit, about how I was disrespecting them and wasn't willing to cooperate with them. And I told them we were perfectly willing to cooperate with them, but we were going to give them the information to answer those two questions, right? And so what happened is Eric McLeish, who was the local counsel, then started talking with the panel and saying, what is it you really want? What is it you want? And then they were saying, we want to have copies of all the recordings of his sessions. We want to have, the information as to whether he billed any of them and was paid, whether they had any insurance that covered it, what he was doing. Did he give them instructions that he was doing a study? And did they sign a document authorizing all the, they went on and on like this. And he started trying to cooperate with them. And I said to him, hold it. I said, that's not what you're here for. You're here to be local counsel because I need to have a local counsel. Like you just barely started practicing law. I've been out for years doing this stuff, and he just kept on going and being willing to participate with them. The assignment I had from John was to help prepare the witnesses, right? Is that we were going to compile all the witnesses, and John started giving me a long list of people to go and contact and giving me their contact information because he knew them all, right? And so I was engaged in this fantastic opportunity to turn this entire event into a positive grand rounds at Harvard University, getting to share this information, which is, history altering information with what I thought, I might have been a little biased, but I thought was the leading educational institution on the planet, right? I said, this is the right place to do this, right? And so I was going around doing all this, and so I was getting to meet I got to meet virtually everybody in the field with a letter of introduction from John Mack, right? And so one of the people, it was a professor at the University of Colorado, that John was proposing he be one of the witnesses, and I sent a note to him telling him what was going on and wanted to get him to be willing to be a witness, and he got so freaked out when he found out what Harvard was doing, because nobody knew about it up to this point. And the panel kept insisting that nobody say anything public about what they were doing. Right. And I kept advising John I said, bullshit. I mean, they brought you into this kind of star chamber and, you're not supposed to tell anybody about it. And so he knew that I wanted to tell someone about it, but I wasn't doing it. I contacted this person at the University of Colorado to solicit him being a witness, and he took it upon himself to contact the media and told them that there was this thing happening at Harvard, that they were going after John Mack, and all of a sudden it broke into the public, and he gets invited to go on what's her head's program, can't remember, but a number of them, and all of a sudden it blows up. Right?
Wasn't he on Oprah talking about this?
Yes, it was Oprah. Yeah, he did. He went on to Oprah because once everybody found out about it, everybody wanted to talk to him, and so he ended up going on Oprah. And the panel insisted that he fire me, because I had violated this agreement that he had, that he wasn't going to tell anybody publicly about it. And even though I hadn't told anybody publicly about it, I was just soliciting this particular professor to be a witness, and he told the people about it. And so John came to me, he said, look, Danny, he said, look, I want you to continue, talking to the people that to be potential witnesses in here, but I'm going to have to tell the panel that I'm firing you. So I was saying, I don't think that's a good idea, but you have to do what you have to do. And so Eric McLeish ended up taking over, dealing with the committee, because the committee didn't want to deal with me. Right. And Eric McLeish ended up constantly trying to settle this thing, get him to get out of it, et cetera. And eschewing the opportunity that we had here to actually start presenting substantive information to these people, at the seat of the liberal worldview, to help do this. So that's how it happened. Eric McLeish, by the way, ended up, I ended up, even though he acted like that, I ended up giving him the first case against the Catholic Church for the pedophile priests. I actually brought him the client, that sued the Boston Archdiocese, the first major lawsuit against the Catholic Church for the pedophiles. And he ended up setting up a cottage industry of settling every one of those cases, and getting them to promise in exchange for a financial grant from the Catholic Church that they wouldn't tell anybody about it. And he ended up being the goat, actually, in the movie. What was it called? About the Boston Globe that had anyway. There was a movie that was called. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a major movie about the whole Boston Catholic pedophile thing that went on. And he ended up being made the kind of bad guy in the movie, because he's the one that was behind the scenes settling all the cases and getting money for the people, and getting them to promise that they'd never tell anybody about it ever. And that's what happened to Eric. And I think Eric finally, because of that movie, I think it was called starts with an S. I can't remember the name of the movie, but the bottom line is he ended up being kind of really embarrassed about what he had gotten to be, is kind of this deal maker, of getting everybody to remain silent and get paid for it, and he's never even talked to me after that. I've never had any conversation with him, but so that he is the one who got the settlement of John being willing to give them some information of the kind that I never would have given them, and they ended up apologizing and stopping harassing him. So in that sense, it was a kind of service, that McLeish provided, but I didn't agree with it and never did. And I'm the one that remained friends with John and became legal counsel for the peer group. Just
interesting.
That's more detail than you may need, but that's
no.
story.
It's great. That's a great story. Like I've been deep into Dr. Mack's story, and it's interesting to hear that side of it, because you don't, like, I had no idea about any of those details about the tribunal, and it seemed much more amicable from the outside. Of course, it never is, right?
No.
And in terms of, and I guess we can leave Dr. Max. The last thing, just to kind of to wrap up his section of it, because we've been on John for a while.
Yeah.
He had a bit of a tragic ending, and I don't know if it's conspiracy, but I've heard some. You hear stories of, like, there were 5 other John Macks that were run down in London on the same day. So I don't know.
No.
If that's just conspiracy,
nothing to it.
It was random. It would hard to seem. Okay.
Nothing to that. That's all, echo in a trash can bullshit. All of it. Which there's a lot of in the ET thing. Yeah, but no, I talked with John. John had just handed over to me a draft of the manuscript of the book that he was going to write about the whole Harvard encounter that he had with the tribunal, to go through it, to fact check it, and to make sure everything was right. He had just handed it to me just before he left to go to London. He was going to London to do a lecture at Oxford, or at Cambridge, I think, or Oxford, on T.E. Lawrence, in the book that he wrote about T.E. Lawrence. And he just, I talked to the people that were with him, when he got killed, and they were just walking along, and he stepped off the curb and just, in typical American fashion, looked in the completely wrong direction, and the car was coming down the left side of the road instead of the right, as they are wont to do in England. And he stepped off the curb and just got hammered by this drunk taxi cab driver, and I got a call. This is 2004, and Kucinich. That's how I just remember. I just remembered who the congressperson was. It was Dennis Kucinich. Because I remember I was working in Dennis Kucinich's campaign in 2004, and I got the call when I was in the office, in the campaign office, from Danny, from Danny Mack, who is John's son, that John had just been hit and killed by this taxi cab, and was wanting to know what to do about it. So I called my investigators right away, and they were on this thing like white on rice, immediately. I found out who the guy was. The guy got arrested, got criminally charged, got prosecuted. He was drunk, and is as far as I know, still in prison. And we did a deep background on the guy, and he didn't have any connections, any intelligence connections or anything.
It seems, if it was a nefarious conspiracy, it seems hard that the hitman would have been drunk. So, that was always the part. It's like, but thank you for clarifying that, because that's one that just you hear rattling around the echo chambers all the time.
Plus, you should be aware of the fact that if in fact it had been a conspiracy to kill him, we would have gotten him. Because that's what I do. I mean, that would be the wrong thing for them to have done. Because they could bet on us catching them. Just like we did in Iran-Contra, just like we did in the Karen Silkwood case, just like we did in the Pentagon Papers, that isn't something that would be very smart for them to do.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to some other stuff, because we're already a little over an hour in here. I don't want to keep you too long.
We're fine. It's Friday afternoon.
Okay, great.
Congress is on vacation. Congress is gone.
Last time I saw you were heading out at like 9 p.m. to go talk to a bunch of Congress people. Nonstop.
Yeah, I'm still doing that.
Good on you, and keep up with the hard work. There, I did want to ask you about There was
Sure.
a short talk that you did at the Sunrise Center back in May of last year, Marin
Hmm.
County. And you got into some kind of fringy topics. And again, we can pass on this stuff if you don't want to comment.
No.
But at some point, you had named 6 different species of
Oh
potential
yeah.
beings. And
Yeah.
at one point, you had a short comment in there about some of them being problematic. And so I just kind of wanted to, if you remember that conversation, just kind of go
Hmm.
into some of this stuff. And again, I know this is a little bit more fringy, but I'm always like, I just want to talk about the stuff that's interesting when I hear things like,
Well,
wait, what?
I think the stuff the ultimate stuff is the most interesting. I mean, all of these other logistical things, and who struck John, and what's the relationship between Lou and and Greer, and what's the story with John Mack and Harvard? Because people thrive on controversy. But this other stuff, which is transcendent information, is really extraordinary. And based on the interviews of all the different people that I interviewed with John Mack at the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research, all the people that I vetted for Dr. Greer, to testify, all the different people I've interviewed over the years that have been involved directly in this stuff. It's become clear to me that there's a species of extraterrestrial beings that are like 3.5 feet tall, and they are the classic. You go to a fifth grader here anywhere in the United States and ask them to draw an ET person, and they'll draw it for you. With the big heads
Big
and
head,
the
big
big the
eyes.
big almond eyes that go around to the side, and little holes for their nose and a little teeny mouth, and big long arms hanging down past their knees, all that. There's a little group that's the what they call the small grays. That's what they're called. Okay, and this is a significant number of the encounters that people have of being taken aboard the craft and encountering them. But then there's another species apparently that is like almost 6 feet tall. 5.5, 6 feet tall, that are like that. But they're a little thinner. They're not squatty like the little dudes. They're kind of thinner, tall. They call them the tall whites or tall grays, and they have the same large head, and but they got this really skinny neck, and people comment about how weird it is that their head is actually on this little skinny neck, but they're very intelligent, very kind, very compassionate. They don't seem to be constantly aware of, they're aware of how frightened people get, but they're not aware of the fact that the things that they're doing to them, examining them and probing them and stuff like that, is as offensive as, as it is, and inappropriate. Uh, but that is they. So that you have the little short grays and you have the tall whites, and then there as the reptilians. And the reptilians get pretty bad press. I mean, mainly because in our culture, in our human culture, reptiles get bad press. That they're cold blooded, and that they eat insects, and that they're kind of weird. All the amphibians that we know, setting aside the people who have pet snakes and lizards, that they have kind of we have kind of this instinctive reaction to reptiles, and so people, but there's this entire scenario that is flogged about the reptilians, and the Church of Scientology has a very specific opinion about them. That David Icke has picked that up.
Is that their boogeyman?
Oh
Is that
yes,
that's their
oh
boogeyman?
yes,
Oh,
oh
interesting.
yes,
I
oh
haven't I
yes,
haven't dove deep into the Scientology
oh
world,
yeah.
but
Well,
I knew there's the extraterrestrial connection, but I didn't know that that was like their
yeah.
specific
Well,
boogeyman.
I got asked to be legal counsel for L. Ron Hubbard and his wife Susan. So I got to know a lot about what they believe, because I insisted upon knowing before I would even make any kind of decision like that. But the bottom line is that the reptilians, are asserted to be from Beta Reticuli, and that they come from a planet that orbits that star, and that they're trashed a lot by people. And as I say, the Scientologists and as I think that but the Scientologists don't talk about this publicly. I mean, even people that are you have to get to a whole level of like a T4 before you even begin to get any inklings of what it is they think they're up to at the Church of Scientology. But what they're up to is they believe that the reptilian species from Beta Reticuli are in this major conflict with the human being like people from the Pleiades, and that they're struggling as to which of them is going to end up establishing dominion over our planet Earth. And L. Ron Hubbard wrote fictitious novels about this. That's where he sort of got the idea from his own mother wit. But the bottom line is David Icke picked up on this, and has flogged that particular thesis. That's the underlying dynamic that's going on. So they've villainized and vilified the reptilian species, and have heroized the Palladians, right?
So like
And
the Nordics, the tall
the
Nordics.
Nordics, yeah, the Nordic
Right.
group. So you got the reptilians and you got the Nordics, and then there's this other one, which is what they call the mantis people. The mantis people are like 7 feet tall. I mean, big, tall, super skinny, kind of hunched over all the time. Really skinny. I mean, people are struck by they look, but they don't appear to have skeletons, but that they're really limber and stuff, but real skinny, and got kind of pointy heads, but they always seem to be in charge. Whenever the mantis people are seen with other species, whether they're the reptilians or the tall or short grays, that they're the ones kind of giving directions. And so you got the small grays, you got the tall whites, you got the reptilians, you got the Nordics, and you got the mantis people. Okay, so these are the five that I've had direct experience in interviewing people who have either been in their direct presence, either on board one of these craft, or they've been in some underground military facility where they've been kidnapped per a MILAB, a military abduction scenario, and they find themselves in an underground military base, U.S. military base, where ET beings are there working side by side with U.S. military personnel and scientists. And that's where, when they say whenever a mantis person is present, they're in charge. And they're giving directions not only to the other ET people, but to the U.S. military people and scientists too. And so those are but it's important that when I talked with Barbara Lamb. Barbara Lamb was a close friend of John Mack's, and I met her way back in 1994. So I've known her for however long that is, like 40 years or something. But the bottom line is, but she had interviewed hundreds of people, probably 200 people who believed that they had direct face-to-face encounters with various species of UFOs and had been abducted and taken aboard their craft, etc. And she had been. She told me this story. She told Sarah and me, my wife, this story, that she'd been always saying, look, I've interviewed these hundreds of people about this. I've had intimate conversations with the people about the experience, and I've never seen any extraterrestrial being. And so that I kept kind of wishing I could get to meet one of them before I die, but hoping that she's going to live many more years. She's like 90 years old now. But she said, I was thinking about this a lot. And one afternoon, I came in out of my garden and I walked into my house in the living room, and here's this reptilian being standing there, just standing there, no suit on or no jumpsuit or any artificial clothes, just standing in the middle of the living room. And she was kind of thunderstruck at the being. And the being gave off these completely compassionate, loving, friendly vibes, to her, and telepathically communicated to her that you've been wanting to get to meet one of the species, and I wanted to make sure that you got to do that. And so I've come here to tell you that here we are, and she was kind of freaked out by it.
I bet.
As you might
I bet.
guess,
Yeah.
but she was so impressed by the kind of compassionate kindness that the reptilian being was giving off, that she was completely kind of put at ease. And then the being just turned around and walked right out of her house. Like, she didn't even know where he went, but she told us that story. And so I wanted to weigh in to give some positive vibes to the reptilian people. That I mean, they may well come from some planet. I mean, our planet is what, 5/6 water, but they may come from a water planet, and live like that.
I always had the fun fantasy of if there was a species that had survived the mass extinction event on this planet when the dinosaurs ruled, then
Yeah,
maybe they could have gone underground and
crypto, the crypto guys.
right, and which to that point, have you heard or are you aware of a native species of any sort? Because I always thought it seems logical that whatever this phenomena are, it's definitely not, number one, it's definitely not nothing. And then number two, it seems like there's more than one thing. So it could be some dimensional, it could be from far off worlds. Could it be also something that's native or has been native
Oh yeah.
to this planet forever?
Well, there's a whole octave of alternative interpretations of who these beings may be. But given the fact that you have these different species, it's clear that there are at least these 5 different species. It's conceivable that they come from different star systems. It's conceivable they could come from one particular star system and that they just all exist as different species, like different races, but they're different species on one particular planetary system. Or they could come from a particular star system on different planets. But given the multitude of star systems just in our galaxy, that the odds are. And I interviewed this fellow Oscar Wolf, that that had been a clerk typist for Project Blue Book, and he was actually in the section of Project Blue Book that investigated these 700 sightings that they couldn't even conceivably explain away because there were too many witnesses, too many photos, and the being that he saw was one of the tall whites. He actually got to be with one at S4 with his commander. And he described the being to me. It was clearly a tall white, as they call them. And so that they've got the different species. I do not, I mean, I've talked to a lot of the folks that have the understanding that we've been through, a number of previous human civilizations on our planet that have been all signs of them have been eliminated by these great catastrophic events that take place. I tend to think that's probably true.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I
I don't,
agree
I
with
don't,
that.
I don't know that they've achieved, space travel technology, but people then tend to fill in, through complete speculation and romantic speculation, what they've been like, and idealize what the thing is. So you have the, Atlantis, in Lemuria, and all these kind of things that go on. And there's all kinds of, this whole UFO issue and extraterrestrial issue is, I won't use the term rife because that's kind of pejorative, but it's full of speculation, because the people in positions of authority who have the information about them are lying and deceiving people and actively trying to suppress this knowledge. So the bottom line is, I don't believe that. Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't believe that this is some other species that lives here. I mean, they live here because they're here, and I think they've set up bases under the water, on the seafloors, possibly even beneath the seafloors, high in the mountains where they're away from everybody, and that is true. Uh, and in the same vein, the technology by means of which they move from their extraterrestrial star system and come here, uh, they unveil, they materialize, uh, coming out of that technology. And so when people encounter them, seeing them materialize or dematerialize, they start to speculate, oh, they must be from some other vibrational dimension, right? So therefore, the kind of extra dimensional source of these beings. And because they see them going into the mountains and diving under the water, they speculate, oh, maybe they live here, maybe they're indigenous to our planet, but I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that that's true. It's not that there isn't some indicia of that, but I think that it's so easy to explain, how this actual extraterrestrial phenomenon would give the impression of being either extra dimensional or crypto, what do they call it?
Crypto terrestrial, something like
Crypto-terrestrial.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
crypto-terrestrial, that's what they call it. I
Yeah.
just don't happen to believe it. Now, but my job at the New Paradigm Institute, running the investigation of all this stuff, and we have to be open to it, but I don't think that's true. I think the extraterrestrial source of these beings is just so obvious. And besides, they've said so. I mean, they've said so to so many different people, not just Betty Hill. I mean, they actually showed her the star chart of where they come from. you know,
Yeah, when
and
you listen to the abduction accounts, they all it's that's a good point. None of them have ever said like, yeah, we flew up from
yeah,
Antarctica.
yeah, right. So it's not that, but their bases here. I'm certain of that. I'm certain because I've talked to people that know that there are bases here.
But they're
you
not
know,
necessarily native to the planet itself.
no, I don't believe they are. I don't believe they
Yeah,
are.
yeah, yeah. And I would assume the same.
Yeah,
If they're here, I would assume that they have just set up watch
yeah.
points, but probably we're not. Like I said,
But
my
but this but this
romantic.
is but this is extremely cool. I mean, that to get to transcend all of this kind of other more logistical details about all of this kind of stuff, to really come to grips with the fact that there is one or more other completely extraterrestrial civilizations, and realizing that that our material universe is like 13.8 billion years old, and they've now discovered through the James Webb Telescope, they've discovered a galaxy that is 13.5 billion years old. And
Yeah, I was
so
gonna
that,
say, I thought they just extended that out to 14 something now.
well, it's they and they're in the process of doing it right now. I mean, as we speak, the John Webb Telescope, the data coming down from it is right here in Santa Cruz. Our one of our offices here in Santa Cruz, because we teach at the university, like a course usually every spring, or had been until recently, and so the bottom line is that if our material universe is 13.8 to 14 billion years old, and they've discovered an entire other galaxy that's 13.5 billion years old. It means that there are star systems in those in those galaxies, that have planets going around them that could be 6 or 8 billion years older than ours. Our star is only 4.6 billion years old. Our planet is only 3. I'm sorry, 3. It's 4.7 billion years old. The sun, and 3.5 billion years old. Our planet. And so that they can be 6-8 billion years older than us, so that they've had all this time to try to figure out technologies, which they obviously are displaying, but also probing into the kind of profound philosophical and even theological questions that our human species has been asking ourselves, for at least the billion years or so that we've been around, they've so to engage these people, these beings, and be able to get access to some of this information, and to kind of feather this information into our culture and help it elevate our culture, is such an extraordinary opportunity. And yet, the military and intelligence community people, it's I've mentioned it before. It's like the old Sufi saying that when the pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. And so that that they're prisming the entire encounter with the UFO beings through the military and intelligence lens of trying to establish and maintain dominion over our planet, and are viewing them as an adversary, as an ultimate other, and it may well be foolhartedly trying to figure out how to get access to their technology and back engineer it so they can engage in some kind of rational military engagement against the ETs. This is a total fool's errand,
Yeah.
and that we have to do everything that we
Yeah, of
can do
course.
to avoid that.
Yeah, and there's the fact that you would even the ego of man that asserts that we're at the pinnacle of
Yeah,
intelligence and military might, or whatever you would want to paint it, just seems patently absurd.
yeah,
And there is
it
a lot
is.
of talk, just to kind of shuffle along this line, of these controlling of, right, speaking of impending timelines. People are throwing out years. Are
Right,
you
right.
personally aware, or is this just kind of echo
No,
chambery stuff of any
no.
sort of impending event that, other than our own potential, catastrophic demise,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
someone might
Self,
be able to
self,
see through a
self
looking glass
emulation.
timeline is coming?
No, no. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or an ET scientist, for that matter, a UFO scientist, to realize that we're in a very precarious, self-imposed situation here. I mean, that we've got we had a point where we had 31,000 nuclear warheads,
Right.
nuclear bombs, and Russia had like 20,000 of these. We've now got it down to our having 1,650
Yeah,
of
like
them.
1,500,
Uh,
1,600.
yeah, and Russia's down to 1,500 of them. And here the START treaty, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, has just expired on February 5th, and here we are having elected a person like Trump, and Trump is just absolutely refusing to engage in continuing the reduction of the nuclear weapons. And he thinks it's a great idea to super modernize our entire nuclear weapons system. And obviously, if you share any information with him about the extraterrestrial UFOs that we've got, all he's going to think of in terms is, let's get at that technology and get it contracted out to a company that he can get some stock in,
Yeah.
basically. So that
Get
that's
his,
what's going on.
enrichment all the way for that guy.
Yeah.
And there's been, speaking of Trump, um, again, probably just echo chamber rumors of some
Yeah.
impending statement that he was preparing to make along the lines of disclosure. Have you heard anything about that that's
Oh, I've
legitimate?
I've I've no, I've heard a lot of information about it, uh, and he is so completely transactional that if he really gets put up against the wall, basically, on all of this Jeffrey Epstein stuff, if it really starts coming out and there is a real threat pending against him to be removed from office, and he's got it to pull, to talk about wagging the dog. I mean, that whole thing, because obviously just invading, Venezuela isn't going to do it. Bombing Iran isn't doing it. Isn't adequately distractive, because the Jeffrey Epstein stuff just keeps on coming. He hasn't been able to divert people. He can send armed military people into all the Democratic Party cities in the country, and it still isn't distracting the people who want to get out the Jeffrey Epstein stuff.
So are we at danger of him doing that, and then everybody's going just like that? It's like, oh, this is just a facade to distract from Epstein, even if he does legitimately bring forward the real right. But I'm like, if it's the actual, he actually breaks it all open, are people just going to dismiss it because of the chaos that is the executive branch right now?
No, I don't think so. I mean, because it's one thing to kind of manufacture something like, let's invade Venezuela, or let's invade and attack Iran. That's all sort of within his power. This other thing is sort of transcendent in its importance. So I don't think people are going to dismiss it. And so in that sense, there's a chance that he could see it as a viable option if he gets put up against the wall. More practically, he could put up the option of threatening to divulge it unless they get it stopped, unless the CIA covert operations, COINTELPRO activities, all that kind of stuff that they could engage in to loose upon the American public to push back and to neutralize this effort on the part of the citizenry from getting at the Epstein stuff. That he might do. That would be more like him and more realistic, is to blackmail, or what they call gray mail people.
Gray mail, the institution that he would divulge everything that they've been doing against the old citizenry if they don't fix this Epstein thing.
That's right. If they don't get it stopped.
Wow.
Yeah.
Diabolical.
Yeah, it's a chess game, and he is smart, in kind of a
he's
feral,
street smart for sure.
Yeah, a feral kind of way, and so that he would not be beyond at all, saying, look at you people who are engaged in all kinds of psyops operations and in propaganda operations. You've been very, very successful in the past in convincing a huge number of the people in positions of authority that the UFO stuff is total bullshit, and anybody who believes in it, ought to have their head examined, literally. That you've been so successful that you better get on your horse here, because if this stuff starts to unseat me, I will blow it out. I will tell everybody about what and what you've been doing, and I'll burn the house down.
Drag everybody down with him.
Yeah. No. There's no doubt at all. He views himself as wanting to be, a trans historical figure, like Alexander the Great and Hitler. True. That's what he's into. He wants to be like Napoleon. He's like a tall guy with a Napoleonic complex.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I mean, he really is. And so he's a dangerous person. And so we're in a different period here. I mean, then I've been around for 80 years, and I've been paying attention to this stuff since I was probably 7 or so. And in all that period of time, we've never been in a situation that is as unstable and dangerous as this is, with him at the helm and the people that he's got in his cabinet. That with the exception of Bobby Kennedy, are all just complete toadies, that will do absolutely anything he tells them to do. And if they start giving commands to the full-time people in the military and in the intelligence community, to come to the aid of the president personally, it's going to be very interesting, because I'm the last one in the world to ever advocate the military, refusing to obey orders from the civilian oversight they're supposed to have. But they too are very much aware of the fact that they're not allowed to obey unconstitutional and illegal orders, even from the civilians. But it's not unhealthy to have the military, having people starting to rely upon the military to defend us against the civilian leadership of our government, and that's the condition that we're in right now.
Seems
So
like
we
uncharted territory all over the place, huh?
it is.
Yeah.
It's
So,
very dangerous right now.
what are the odds that the status quo of the dysfunctional institutions maintain this narrative and drive it into the ground, and that the only way out of this is just something catastrophic happening?
Well, that leads us to the question of what these people are referring to when they refer to catastrophic. They refer to catastrophic disclosure, and it's very clear that one of the profoundly important pillars of this catastrophe that they're talking about is unseating the people in positions of power right now. I mean, the discovery of the reality of the extraterrestrial civilization and its presence here on our planet really threatens to undermine the hard fought for uh, authority that the people in positions of power presently have. And people that are in the military very clearly perceive their mission assignment as protecting the people in positions of power right now. I mean, they have, in a sense, a political agenda, and that is to keep the people in positions of power right now. And so that's part of their motivation in being worried about the rapid revelation of a lot of this information, that it will destabilize the people in positions of authority. But the problem is right now is a lot of these people in positions of authority are getting destabilized already by the Trump administration. I mean, they're the people, just like the people that put Hitler into power, back in 1924 to 1933. That whole period, that 10-year period, during which major financial interests in the United States, at Brown Brothers Harriman specifically, helped finance the rise to power of Hitler to be the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe on behalf of the transnational corporate capitalist system in Western civilization, and they lost control of him. They brought Hitler into power to be the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe, but when he ascended into a position of such power that he came loose from the leash, and almost ruined the world, you know. And so there's a real danger of that with Trump, of
Yeah.
him coming loose,
Eerie
because they
similarities.
Oh yeah, well. I mean, that I knew the people that ran the investigation for Trump's first wife during their divorce process, and I know all kinds of
Oh.
things about him. You know,
Oh, give us some dirt, Danny. Give us some
well, no,
dirt.
not dirt. It's just that he had a copy of Mein Kampf on his bedstand, and a copy of the speeches translated into English, the speeches of Adolf Hitler, and used to read them for his nighttime reading. And she was freaked out by this. His first wife, you know, uh, as one should be. And so, he's running that playbook. There's no doubt about it. Just like deploying all these ICE guys and Border Patrol people in full military regalia with masks and truncheons. These are the brown shirts. They're actually wearing brown shirts. I mean, these are the brown shirts. And he is scapegoating the immigrants. Just like Hitler did the Jewish people, and calling them vermin and all of that stuff, attacking the media as being inherently non-credible, and why Dr. Greer would be suspicious that if someone like this were to get in control of the actual technology, might be perfectly willing to stage some kind of false flag, because that's the Reichstag fire, as part of the playbook. And so that this is an extremely dangerous period of time that we're in here, and that's why the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists have upped the doomsday clock. They've just moved it up to 85 seconds before midnight. That's out of all the seconds that you add up in a 24-hour clock. They're down to 85 seconds before midnight, which is thermonuclear total catastrophe to our planet, because of a yeah, this is extraordinarily dangerous. And so that that the military personnel are actually talking with each other below the ranks of, Hegseth and the toadies that he's trying to put into position, that they're actually talking about what to do, if he were to ever try to give them an order to use nuclear missiles of any kind, about how they deal with that. And I now know that there are specific discussions that went on during the first term when he was here the first time. I mean, there were actually military high command people discussing what in the world to do with Trump, because if Trump was willing to was willing to call people in to attack the Capitol building, to stop the vote certification. He would be willing, if really put to the wall, to resort to whatever power he could get his hands on to keep himself in positions of power. So this is a very, very dangerous situation that we're in. In the UFO issue, is that Trump would see this as a trump card, if you will, to be able to play, and not so much in just telling everybody about it and running everything into chaos, but in fact playing it as a blackmail card. That you national security state people get your act together and deploy whatever your domestic psych operations is you have to control the public, and get busy and shut this down, or else I'm going to blow the lid on you guys.
Seems dangerous. What wasn't that, not to that extent of brazen just nihilism, but is there's I've heard speculation that that was one of the reasons that potentially JFK would have been a target, was that he was very adamantly wanting to kind of push the envelope on getting this out. Would that not be
is different
when they just take him out, right? Basically what I'm trying to say is, like, if he threatened that, would they smoke him?
Let me back up a bit on that, because there's real stuff in there other than just speculation. And what that is that that because of not the Bay of Pigs events of April of 1961, but the October missile crisis of October of 1962, when the United States and Soviet Union came to within like 2 minutes of actually having a massive thermonuclear exchange, would have totally destroyed all of civilization, and potentially terminated our species, with the radioactive poisoning. And because of that, both Khrushchev and Kennedy had become totally traumatized by how close they came. And Kennedy had gone through this, what we call in religious practice, a metanoia experience, where he realized that there's something radical had to be done here. And what they did is they began a series of an exchange of letters outside of the supervision of the State Department, outside of the supervision of the CIA. And they began exchanging letters through a guy by the name of Norman Cousins, his name was. And they delivered back and forth 18 different messages, letters to each other. And that they had decided that they were going to each start to exercise their respective executive authority to start to actively disassemble the nuclear warheads of both nuclear arsenals, and to destroy the warheads, not just to put them on a shelf so they can, within a matter of hours, they could put them back on the missiles. They were going to destroy them. And in order to, if they were going to shut down the entire economic stimulus to both countries of the massive military spending on nuclear weapons production and stuff, Kennedy proposed replacing it with a joint space program of this Russia and the Soviet Union and the United States to join together to engage in voyaging out into space together, partnership. To maintain the stimulus to their economies, and one thing. And so what he did on June 5th of 1963, John Kennedy contacted McCone, who was the new CIA director, because Allen Dulles had been dismissed, basically. And he contacted McCone and asked him to get JFK briefed up on all the UFO information. Okay. And he was clearly intending to share it secretly with Khrushchev. as a sign of good faith that they were going to be transparent with each other, because he had gotten into trouble lying to Khrushchev earlier after the Bay of Pigs invasion, and promised he was going to stop all the Operation 40 operations going on against Cuba, which he didn't. So he had to really reach in to do something to show good faith with Khrushchev, to get them to agree to follow through on dismantling the actual nuclear warheads. And so he asked John McCone to give him this information. And McCone went to the people in the agency, like Bissell and other people, to start gathering this information all together. And they went and told Allen Dulles. Even though Dulles had been relieved of command as the head of the CIA, he was still legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman. And Brown Brothers Harriman are the ones that had recommended creating the CIA. Robert Lovett, who was one of the senior partners of Brown Brothers Harriman, is the one that wrote the memo to Truman recommending the creation of the CIA. That's why Allen Dulles, legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman, was made the first civilian director of the CIA. I mean, if you really want the background of it. And so what happened is that Dulles then gave the green light to the assassination team that had been put together by Richard Nixon back in 1960 to kill Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. He gave the green light to them to kill the president, which they did. But it wasn't because he asked for the UFO information. It was his asking for the UFO information is what revealed the fact that he had this exchange of letters going on. When Dulles found out about it and realized what they were doing, and they were threatening to dismantle the nuclear warheads, the China lobby, which really resides out at Brown Brothers Harriman, there's a whole history of it. The China lobby, that they're the ones that helped fund the rise of Hitler into power in Europe by setting up the Union Bank of New York, and then setting up a subsidiary up in the Netherlands called the Bank of Shipping and Commerce that funded the construction of the entire international headquarters of the Third Reich. They're the ones that did it. Okay. And their idea was to have Hitler become the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe. And then Brown Brothers Harriman and the 20 of the major wealthy families in the United States that were the robber barons, basically, they were going to turn all of their attention westward into the Pacific, over into China, into Asia, to start getting access to their resources. And they owned the bulk of the shares in the military industry of Germany, because they had taken them as collateral for the loan that Brown Brothers Harriman gave to Germany to pay the war reparations, which Brown Brothers Harriman actually drafted into the Treaty of Versailles with Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles. They were on the drafting team for the Versailles Treaty because they were the nephews of Robert Lansing, who was the Secretary of State for Wilson. I mean, there's a whole history here that people don't know about. But the reality is that that's what happened. It wasn't that John Kennedy was killed because he was getting set to divulge the UFO information to Khrushchev, or to make it public, much less. But it was because they were getting set to disassemble the nuclear warheads, and the China lobby knew that they had to have the nuclear weapons to confront China, because they couldn't take China on in a traditional land war, because China had already displayed to the United States in Korea that they could put 1 billion men into uniform and put them into the field against our traditional forces. And so the U.S. knew they couldn't take on China. And so the whole China lobby people, when they realized that he was getting set to try to disassemble the nuclear warheads of our arsenal, said, that's it. This is treasonous. It's not only against our economic interests in developing the Asian markets, which they were still desperately trying to get by doing the Vietnam War later, trying to get a land base in there, but this is what's really going on. These are the strategic levels. I mean, I was fortunate to be legal counsel at the Jesuit National Headquarters for a decade, and they deal on a global trans-historic level of understanding what's going on.
The true global chess match.
Yes, it's the chess match. Yeah, and that's what this is all about. In this issue of the UFO issue is the king on the chessboard. This is those who have this information and have access to this technology, are going to be the ones to checkmate everybody else. And that's where we are right now. And so that this kind of process that you see kind of sporadically happening here of different, every once in a while there's another hearing in front of the Congress and another witness comes forward and gives a little more. There's this whole kind of process that's going on right now, which I'm fairly privy to, is part of this thing of trying to figure out how to checkmate this national security state that has risen into power ever since the passage of the National Security Act of 1947. That has created the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Council, and then they created things like the Defense Intelligence Agency, et cetera. That this entire infrastructure that is in place now that is dedicated to the mission of pursuing, securing, and maintaining their continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials of the planet, so that they can have these materials available for our corporations, because they're a fascist group. And what fascism is, as the essay that was written by Mussolini back in 1933 makes perfectly clear, is to place at the disposal, or to place the instrumentalities of the government at the disposal of the interests of private corporations that are still privately owned. And so that the finances are running to the owners of the shares of those stocks. That's Brown Brothers Harriman. It was a private investment group in the shares that were pulling the strings on this thing back then, and it's now evolved into what it is today, which is the World Economic Forum and all of the different major corporations that you see kind of hovering around the money, and that's unfortunate. It's a function of our human species. There's an element of our human species that are driven by fear and terror. Really, they find themselves at sea in the universe. They have no direct experiential unitive experience, and that they therefore believe that their whole motive is just to vanquish and control others, and try to enrich themselves. Feeding that hole in their soul. And that's what we're dealing with here.
And you can't take any of it with you, which is the ultimate tragedy of it all.
No.
And so,
no.
to yeah. And you, yeah,
I didn't mean to blow you
speechless.
out.
No. It's great because you gotta. It's like so unbelievable. But and I guess what keeps me positive about it, and my faith about it all is into I guess to bring it in line with the UFO topic, is that it does seem, and you've heard this from just abductees or just over and over, that if this planet is of ecological importance to others or something else, that they would hopefully, and maybe they're not, would they not let us, would they stop us from destroying the planet? Maybe we'll take ourselves out, but would they not let the entire planet be annihilated because it's of value to them?
Yeah, it's the mutation of the genetic material that is what they're going to prevent. Yeah, because they're collecting flora and fauna in genetic material, including human genetic material. I believe to seed life elsewhere in the galaxy, where the planets are capable of sustaining life, but they're not capable yet of gestating life. Whereas our planet is one of the comparatively rare planets that gestates life. Obviously, there are others in the universe because they've gestated these other species in other star systems. So there are some planets that do this, but they're comparatively rare, and therefore,
and do you think?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, and therefore, to threaten to contaminate and mutate the genetic material that is generated on our planet is a mortal sin.
Right. Yeah, as it would be if it is of value for that purpose.
Yes.
And a massive nuclear exchange would just throw all that into chaos.
Totally mutates the genetic material. That's what it does.
And so I wonder, to what extent are you aware of them guiding our species to any level? Is it letting us make the decisions on our own? You know, like, are we smart enough to figure this out? Where they'll let us extinct ourselves, but not the planet, and or would they fully step in and like, hey, knock it off, and we can bring the planet's citizenry together before complete catastrophic failure for our species?
This is one of the questions that when Lou and I had just gotten through briefing the Inspector General the first time in Washington, and we were sitting with in a closed restaurant, but we were there with some of the other people that were in his staff in ATIP. And one of them actually asked the question. He says, "Look, why don't they just come down and let everybody know they're here and stop all of this stuff going on and intervene like this?" And I told them, and they asked me, as I from being from Jesuit headquarters, you know, and they thought that maybe there might be some other insight into what's going on here. And I said, you know, that it's important to remember the story of the little boy that loved butterflies. And what he did is he collected different species of butterflies, and he had this big, huge netting out in his backyard where all the butterflies were flying all around. And he wanted to find an example of a monarch butterfly. And he finally found this cocoon of a monarch butterfly, and he brought it back home, and he put it in this little box with cotton and stuff and put lights on it to keep it warm. And he watched it go through the whole metamorphosis process. And it came to the point where the butterfly was trying to break out of the cocoon, and it was flapping and flapping and flapping its wings and tearing at these little silken threads on the cocoon. And it got down to the last silken thread, and it was thrashing and thrashing against this thread. And the little boy kept watching this, and he kind of took pity and said, this is awful, watching this poor butterfly struggle like this. And he went and got a little pair of scissors, and he snipped that last silken thread, and the butterfly came free. And it was an absolutely perfect specimen of a monarch butterfly, except that it could never fly, because it turns out that it was struggling against that last silken thread that actually developed the muscle systems in the entire wing set that they had to be able to fly. And so that the bottom line is that we have to demonstrate that we're capable of breaking these silken threads that we've woven around ourselves, you know, with greed and avarice and seeking of political power and economic power and dominion over the world. We've got to be able to demonstrate that we can break that last silken thread ourselves in order to fly, in order to join them and to go into outer space and to be able to venture. Otherwise, our people are planning right now to try to bring nuclear weapons into outer space. They're actually engaged actively in the process. They're training people. Our United States Air Force is training people at a base, I know where it is, to fight war, nuclear war in outer space. Absolutely, totally outside of the oversight and supervision of the United States Congress, you know, that has the exclusive authority, you know, under Article 1 to be in charge of this. You know, and so this is an extraordinarily dangerous period at dimensions that people don't even realize.
Is that a direction of the president, or under whose direction is that happening?
That's under the direction of the Legacy Group. The Legacy Group that is it has access to this technology that is capable of moving in outer space. No, we need to be clear about it. You know, that we as citizenry, you know, have to raise our own consciousness so that we understand that the pressure to be placed against these threads that have been woven around us by ourselves participating in it, you know. I mean, people are still, you know, driving their cars with the gasoline and putting the crap up into the atmosphere that the ET people have been telling us, stop polluting your atmosphere. You know, you're contaminating your atmosphere with this stuff, and stop doing nuclear weapons. People are all paying their taxes. You know, I mean, when Donald Trump says he wants to spend trillions of dollars to renew our entire nuclear weapons systems, you know, people are still just, you know, bovine like, just paying their taxes, you know, to support this and say, well, it's not my responsibility, it's somebody else's. You know, it's whoever we elect to go to Congress is supposed to do something about this. You know, our job is to encourage the people in Congress to fulfill their constitutional duties. to exercise control over this, to get control of this, to take this out of the hands of the legacy group, assert control over it as our elected representatives. And if they won't do it, then we have to replace them, which requires more than sitting around like couch potatoes watching football, and on the weekends, or watching one of the 500 movies that you can get by talking to your television set. Now, I mean, that we've got to do our job. Okay. And so that's what the New Paradigm Institute is here for, to try to organize our people, to help educate our people, to mobilize our people, to facilitate them being able to communicate with their elected representatives. We're going to be having these pledge cards that we're going to go to all of the candidates, in all 435 congressional districts around the country, in all of the 33 states where they're electing senators, and have them sign this pledge card that if they're elected, that they will in fact support full disclosure of the UFO information, and if they won't sign such a pledge card, we're going to tell everybody, during their campaign, we're going to tell you won't support, disclosure, that you're willing to help keep this secret.
The leverage point there is that most people are curious about this subject, about this subject.
Yeah. That's
and
right.
So I know that from their point of view, it might seem that's bad, it's kooky, I don't want to be associated with it, but actually
they want to know.
They're representing, their citizenry wants to know what the hell is going on.
That is right. That is right. And that's why the task force that's been set up, inside the House Oversight Committee, that we've all taken steps to get their juridical structures put in place to be able to do this, so that the House Oversight Committee and the House of Representatives that appropriates all the funds, they're the ones that do the appropriations bills, that just need to get ratified by the Senate. But they're the ones in the House Oversight Committee is the place to deal with this. And they have set up a task force for the disclosure, the declassification of government secrets. And they've got the agenda on the UFO issue, just like they had the agenda on the Epstein documents. The same exact task force has these two things. And so what we're saying is, look at that, figure out on how to get all the information revealed about the Epstein information. And in doing so, you're building up the muscles. You're building up the muscles that you need to have to break these threads of maintaining secrecy over these things. And once you've gotten the strength to know how to draft a bill for transparency on the Epstein files and put it onto the floor, and when the leadership of the Republican Party, in Mike Johnson, as the Speaker of the House, refuses to allow that to go to the Rules Committee to give it a rule, to put it on the floor for a vote, you know what that is, because they did it in the Epstein case. And so now you've figured out what you have to do is get a discharge petition. You have to get a majority of people in the House of Representatives to sign the discharge petition, and they order them to put it onto the floor for a vote. And once you get that done, and Trump and everybody else knows that you're going to get this done, he then orders the Republicans to support it so he can get control over it. So what we're doing right now is we're setting up all the juridical structures inside the House Oversight Committee, inside the task force for declassification of government secrets. All the personnel that are working on this thing are learning how to go about doing this thing. Okay, so we are building the muscle structures that we need to break these last silken threads of the national security state that has bound us up. Okay, and that we have to join in with other countries, with Russia and China and India, and the European Union people, and all of the people of South America and Africa. We have to join together to say, look, that this cannot be allowed to continue. This is dangerous. This is threatening our own survival as a species. And so that we have to mobilize. We have to get up off the couches, to put the clicker down, and pay attention. The new Paradigm Institute is here. That we're going to be organizing people in your community, in all 435 congressional districts in all 50 states. So you're going to have a place to go, and they're going to reach out to you, and they're going to share the information with you so that you can get educated on all this. And even if we have to put it in some kind of form of infotainment to get people to pay attention to it, I mean, you might as well, while you're sitting there clicking, looking at things, you might as well get educated on the UFO issue, because we
I think
know
that's
that
a
you
great
want to.
idea, by the
Yeah,
way, Danny, for the
yeah,
citizen disclosure and all those efforts. I think that's kind of how, if I was going to have like a critical look from the outside, I think you got to be able to take a playbook from Hollywood and put it in front of the habits that are already happening, that
that's
are
right.
the part of the
That's right.
dysfunction.
That's right. And this is one of the most interesting subjects possible, you know. And so, it's got all the adventure of CIA covert operations and political assassinations and all the stuff that people have been titillized about. And so that what we're going to do is we're going to get the information to them, mobilize people, let them know that they can demand that their candidates, in both parties, any candidate at all, for any seat in Congress, has to sign the pledge card, that you pledge that if you are elected, that you will support full disclosure of the UFO information. And if you won't, then we're going to tell everybody that you won't do it, and people are going to hound them, in their town meetings, and, when they're going to the airport, to collar them in the airport, saying, what's the story about you refusing to support disclosure of this stuff, you know? And that's make it an issue. And that's what the New Paradigm Institute is doing. So that's why we just ask people, to just go on the internet to newparadigminstitute.org, and join up. It's totally free, that we will give you the information. You become a citizen for disclosure, and you'll join with the people in your own congressional district and in your own town and city, the Citizens for Disclosure, and you will then get busy, helping to break these last silken threads, of the national security state that are binding us in and leading us to potential self-destruction.
Yeah,
We have to stop this.
I'm absolutely. I'm a member of my local chapter. I was
Good.
just emailing with the Oregon lead associate, whatever
Yes.
you guys would call
Yes.
him,
They're the leads. Yeah. Hmm.
yesterday. So I would encourage everybody that's watching this to go uh, find their local chapter and get involved as well.
And we'll have that for you at the New Paradigm Institute. Just go at newparadigminstitute.org, and you go to the section that has Citizens for Disclosure, and they'll put you in direct touch with the nearest chapter, or you may start a chapter. I mean, really, we have to get people beyond the thing, oh, maybe somebody else is going to do it, and I'll go to their meeting. You may have to call the meeting. you know you may have to organize the people and invite people to your house and show them the age of disclosure. Here's 34 people that are all above top secret clearances telling you that the UFO issue is real, and that they're extraterrestrial and they're here. And so what are we going to do about it? So that's what we're asking people to do.
Yeah, get involved. Do your part as a citizen if you care about this.
Yeah.
So, before we wrap up, Danny, I know that you have been working hard with your own podcast, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of plug that. And then also, I had something, I did a little research on. You had something in your February podcast about a specific individual alleges a legacy group controlling you for information. Former principal deputy DNI Stephanie Sullivan, retired Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, Dick Cheney. Didn't know. Anyway, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of plug your show. And any last cool stories, because you do a lot of great work, coming on a lot of podcasts. I appreciate you giving me the time. I'm not a Jesse Michaels size outlet yet, hopefully someday, but I appreciate you giving the time. So what are some of the things or some of the stories that you find interesting that you might not get to talk about very often, number one? And then number two, where can everybody else follow you on your other podcasts?
Well, that we have our newsletter that we put out at newparadigminstitute.org.
Highly recommend.
Every week there's a newsletter which has links in it of some of the major things that are in different podcasts. That it's all at one sitting. You can get it all, and you can say, "Oh, here are the key podcasts this week," and I'll go take a look at them. So that's one that I would recommend people go to and become a member of the Citizens for Disclosure. I have a weekly podcast that we've just started beginning. It's just that the Spectrovision Radio has set up a thing with Spotify. Spotify over the internet asked me to do this thing weekly. And what I do is I do a little synopsis. It's about a 30-minute show. So we do a synopsis of what the major news stories are that are going on in the world. And then we try to relate it to the UFO issue. Why should anybody pay attention to the UFO issue in light of, the fact that there's, 3,000 military people have been dispatched to Minneapolis, to try to, arrest, they've got 70,000 people that are in detention camps all over the country now, and shooting people in the streets in Minneapolis. Why should we worry about the UFO issue? So that my job is to try to connect the UFO issue to what's going on in the world in a given week, and then have an essay part, a 15-minute essay part where I begin to discuss with them some of these profound philosophical and theological questions that are posed by the discovery that we are not only not in the geographic physical center of the universe, as we kind of came to realize, 2 centuries ago, 4 centuries ago now, 5 centuries ago now. But the bottom line is that we're not at the apex of all biological sentient life in the universe, and we're going to have to come to grips with this and figure out where our place is in the order of the universe. What do we do about this? These are things that people aren't talking about, and everybody's down into the kind of logistical nitpicking, which is important. But they need to have some place where they have a discussion of their more profound philosophical and theological, as well as public policy questions. What do we do about our economic structures on our planet? What do we do about the religious institutions on our planet? That are quite primitive, that in fact were put in place thousands of years ago, 2,000 years ago for the Christians and 5,000 years ago for the Jewish people, and older for the Hindu and Buddhist, that we've got to get these up into the 21st century to come to grips with the ET beings, to have a discussion. Are they the angels that intervened? Are these the people? This is why there's a virgin birth, that somehow there was this
Right.
impregnation, that, all these kind of things that people are
Sounds very much
about.
like an abduction experience where there's a seed planted there.
I know. And so that people don't have an opportunity to talk about these things for the most part. So we have the Full Disclosure podcast, every week, that's on SpectraVision Radio on Spotify. So people can just go click. Okay, Spotify Radio, Full Disclosure podcast with Danny Sheehan. So that's there, and we're working on that to kind of muscle that one up. But mainly, I get a chance to talk with people like yourself that have your own podcast thing. You have your own audience that you worked up, so I can get to talk to people and at least answer specific questions that you have. So I'm very happy to get to do it. And so, you don't need to worry that you're not the size of Jesse Michaels' thing. Jesse's thing wasn't that big when he first started, either. What you do is you have to have interesting conversations, and people will start to listen.
Yeah, exactly. And I just like to talk about the things that I find interesting, and it's a subject that I've been following since I was a kid. So And before I let you go, that your note about your newsletter, highly recommend, great read. It reminds me of a letter that you had put out a few months ago now at this point, where you kind of, and I'm actually going to, with your permission, I want to turn it into a script for an episode on my channel.
Sure.
You wove together the stories of the UFO subject and the accelerating pace of AI, and it was a really interesting. That's one of those things that I don't find it a coincidence that the accelerating pace of AI and our race towards, AGI or a full sentient creation. I don't find it a coincidence that that's overlapping with the increasing contact that we seem to be having with the phenomena.
That is right. That is right.
So just before I let you go, if you want to kind of dive into that a little bit.
Well, some of the major movers and shakers that are trying to get the legislation passed in Congress right now, that we've drafted a major bill major 58-page bill that's been provided to the Congress now on the disclosure process. And some of the people that I've been talking with in the military and intelligence agencies suspect that the small grays, at least, are in fact genetically engineered entities, biological entities that have been created by an AI superintelligence, like a computer-based AI. And that most people are too young to realize that there was a movie, I think back in 1955 or so, it was called Forbidden Planet. And most people haven't even heard of it, but it hypothesized that there was a planet in our galaxy that had been discovered, and there was a little settlement of people human beings had gone to settle, a little outpost on this place, and they discovered that under the planet, underground on the planet, was this gigantic computer system that there had been a species that lived on the planet, but they had somehow become extinct. But they had created this huge AI general intelligence computer that was like the size of a city underground, and that they were called the Krill. Or the Krull, Kurll, Krull, the Krull, and that there's some of the people, serious people in the military and in the intelligence community, who suspect that in light of the experience that we're going through right now, that once you reach a certain level of computer technology, you start realizing that you can generate these kind of semi-sentient computers, and that we're on the brink right now of knocking on what they call it, the
Singularity?
singularity. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're coming to the singularity where the computer will become sentient, and will actually be able to start reprogramming itself and starting making decisions that are completely independent from those who created it, etc. And they think that because, in light of the fact that we're knocking right on that door right now, if you have a sentient, intelligent civilization that may be 6 or 8 billion years older than our own, that they may have figured this out, like 3 billion years ago. And so that the computer system that they've generated is on a planet somewhere that is doing all these things. And this, I mentioned in passing, this guy, Oscar Wolf, that was the clerk typist for the Project Blue Book section of the classified section still. And when he went to Area 51, then was taken to S4, where the being was actually there and being interviewed, and he was in this big booth, or a big room size thing with a two-way mirror in it, and he didn't want to go near the guy. He didn't want to go near the ET guy because he thought he was demonic.
Oh,
Because
that's right. I have heard that story.
Oscar was a member of this thing called the Worldwide Church of God, this really heavy fundamentalist Christian reactionary church, and that was his take on it. And he didn't want to go near him, but his commander went in and met with the being and had this telepathic exchange with him. But Oscar was staying outside intentionally, and they showed him the boxes of these index cards where they had taken notes on an interview, the telepathic interviews. They had a series of the interviews with this being, right? And one of the questions was, who are you guys? And what are you doing here? And his answer was that I am part of this galactic group of beings from different star systems that have been tasked to go around inside the galaxy monitoring life on the different planets where it's actually arisen. And that's what I'm part of, and have been tasked to kind of do that. And so then they did a follow-up question saying, "Oh, isn't it, like who has tasked you to do this? What kind of authority has tasked you to do this?" And his answer was, "Well, you people would call it God, but it's a lot different than you think."
Yeah. Yeah, and you try to pull that apart. Is like, what does that mean?
That's right. That's
You
right.
know?
Yeah. And we're surprised. We're surprised that maybe we haven't figured it out. Like even the most sophisticated theologians of our human family, maybe they haven't figured it out like they think, and it may be something quite different. But he says it's still that same thing that you people are talking about. But he hasn't uh, but he didn't want to talk about it anymore. Because he thought they were demonic, and he didn't believe them. He didn't believe him, so he never told anybody. So he called me because he was on his deathbed. He was actually dying, and he contacted me, I think because he knew I was at Jesuit headquarters, uh, and wanted to talk about it. And so, he was in hospice when I talked to him, and he explained that to me of what his experience was. So that these are important issues for us to address here, but we're going to have disclosure, not just by our national security state people, and by our Congress. We're going to have disclosure on the part of a lot of the major religious institutions, especially the Catholic Church, of course, because they know a lot. They know a lot, and that they, back in 2009, in November 10th of 2009, they actually, at the direction of Pope Benedict, not the most progressive guy in the world, actually convened a whole meeting of there all kinds of scientists, astronomers, and what they call them, astrophysics and astrobiology people, to the Castle Gandolfo. And after they had this big week-long meeting, he ordered the issuing of a public statement by the Vatican on November 10th of 2009, and it was issued from the press room at the Vatican by Father Jose Gabriel Funes, who was the director of the Pontifical Observatory out at Castle Gandolfo. And the statement said, in light of the discovery of more and more of these new exoplanets, it has now become clear that much sooner than had been previously anticipated, we're going to be discovering life elsewhere in the universe. And therefore, the time has arrived for the laity to engage in this extremely important set of conversations, inquiring into the questions, the profound philosophical and theological questions that are going to be posed to us by our discovery of life elsewhere in the universe. So they issue this statement, right? And so what I do, because I've been legal counsel with the Jesuit headquarters at their social ministry office for a decade, I contacted Father Funes and went to see him, sat down with him, and within the first 2 minutes of our conversation, he says, look, Danny, he said, we're not talking here about the discovery merely of some single cell life form under some frozen sea, on some moon orbiting a planet around some distant star in some other galaxy. He said, we're talking about another highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human species right here in our Milky Way galaxy. Okay. And so I believe that what we're engaged in doing is trying to generate this profound discussion among the laity of what this really means. Okay. In that we're going to have to call upon the Catholic Church with Leo there now to come clean, to try to divulge to us the information that they know about this, just like the national security state has to reveal this information to us, just like people in the Soviet Union or in the Russia now have to divulge what they know about this stuff. And the theologians have to become involved, the historians, the economists, the political scientists. We all have to become engaged in this. The universities, the academic community, the physicists, everybody have to become involved in this. And if we approach it in an upward, positive, forward state of mind about the whole thing, instead of this kind of crabbed back, terrified, dialectical confrontation with some ominous threat, if we approach it from an upward, positive, forward mindset, this is the most extraordinarily interesting period of time, perhaps in all of human civilization. you know And we need to understand that those of us who are privileged to be alive now, the 4 generations of us that are alive right now at varying ages, have the opportunity to be the people who help set the protocols for how we're going to be dealing with this extraterrestrial civilization for the next 10,000 years. People are going to look back thousands of years from now at this particular period, this like 4 or 5 year period that we're now entering into, where we're going to be doing this. And so people need to understand that we're at a pivot point in all of history for our human civilization and our human species, and that's how important this is. So get up off the couch, put the clicker down, contact
football.
You kill your television set. No, don't kill your television set. But contact the New Paradigm Institute, become part of the Citizens for Disclosure, get read up on what it is that's going on. We've got all kinds of podcasts and video footage for you, and everything else is very, very interesting, but just instead of watching, one of these 500, movies, learn about what's going on in the universe and what's going on in the world, on our planet. That's my request to people.
Yep, absolutely. And that's why I do this project too. And it's, YouTube is now the most watched thing on TV, more than Netflix,
That's right.
more than anything else. And so
That's right.
That's why I'm trying to leverage this platform.
That's what you're doing, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your time, Danny. I'll let you go at that. Going at 2.5 hours. Phenomenal on a Friday evening. Danny Sheehan, very generous with your time. Always
I appreciate it.
Phenomenal conversation. Make sure everybody you're watching this, go to the New Paradigm Institute, become active in Citizens for Disclosure, and just get interested and get involved. And
absolutely, let's do it. Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks, Jason. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks, buddy. Take care. So I want to take a second to sit with just what happened in this conversation. Danny took us from the halls of Harvard to underground military installations, from the Attica prison crisis to the Doomsday clock sitting at 89 seconds to midnight, from John Mack's momentous work in Tribunal to insider speculation about gray beings potentially being engineered by AI superintelligence, from the Vatican publicly addressing extraterrestrial life to the very real constitutional crisis unfolding around whether Congress can force that truth into the open. A few things that kind of really hit me. Number one, and we already knew this, but just the level of the active suppression. Not just hiding the truth, but deliberately flooding every nook and cranny of public and private discussion with wild speculation to keep us all confused. And that we're basically fucked because gatekeepers are operating from irrational fear of losing control of their power. And the only way to overcome this is to force their hand through legal, constitutional processes. If you're still on the fence about the ET reality, just remember Danny's point about solar systems that could be 6 to 8 billion years older than ours. Just let that sink in for a moment. Whatever intelligence may have emerged from those systems has billions of years of a head start on us. We are definitely not the adults in the room. And ultimately, this is all a chess match. Disclosure isn't just about whether aliens are real. It's about power. Who holds it, who loses it, and what happens when that power is threatened. If this conversation moves something in you, then please share it. Not for the algorithm, but because this information matters. Because right now might genuinely be the most important moment in human history. And most people are literally sleepwalking right through it. So let me say thank you to Danny Sheehan again for your generosity to take time to sit with me. I truly appreciate you. And with that, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one soon. Take care, my friend.